Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The hiss of air brakes. That used to be the sound of arrival. A long haul done. Now, it's a punctuation mark in a sentence I wish I never started reading. They tell you the Mojave is empty, a sun-scorched canvas of nothing. They're liars. Or maybe they just haven't driven the routes I drive, the ones that don't always show up on the GPS. Out here, the heat doesn't just bake the asphalt, it warps reality. And the manifest? That's just paper. The real cargo. The real rules. They're scrawled on the back of greasy diner placemats, whispered by truckers whose eyes have seen too many sunrises over endless, indifferent sand. One old-timer, found with his rig idling just off Route 66, cabin door swinging in the breeze, phone still clutched in his hand. His last search. Mojave shadow figure speed. He knew. He just didn't follow their rules. Tonight, I'm breaking one of mine by telling you this. Because what I haul, and what I have to do to get it from state line to state line, well, let's just say some packages scream. And some roads demand a toll you ain't carrying in your wallet. Stick around, if you dare. My name's Jake Navarro. Been hauling freight for 13 years, ever since my discharge from 29 Palms. The Marines taught me discipline, but the desert taught me fear. After Dad's trucking company went belly up during the recession, I inherited his 2009 Peterbilt 379 and a pile of debts that could have choked a rhinoceros. Figured I'd work the standard routes, LA to Phoenix, Vegas to Bakersfield. Clean, legal, boring. That lasted exactly 3 months. Fuel costs were eating me alive. Broker rates dropped so low I was practically paying companies to haul their freight. Then Roberto Mendez cornered me at the Pilot truck stop in Barstow, grease-stained baseball cap pulled low over bloodshot eyes. He'd been driving these routes since before I was born, and his weathered hands shook as he lit another Marlboro. "You want real money, mijo?" he asked, exhaling smoke that seemed to hang too long in the still air. "There's a dispatcher works out of Needles, name's Cassandra Yazzie. She's got contracts nobody else will touch." Roberta leaned closer, his breath reeking of cheap coffee and something else, something metallic. "But Jake, once you start hauling her loads, you don't get to quit. The desert don't let go that easy." I should have walked away, should have kept scraping by on the legitimate runs. But when your choices are bankruptcy or taking a leap into the unknown, well, a man makes his peace with compromise. 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from Cassandra in a ramshackle office behind Dus's desert stop, watching her slide an envelope across a table sticky with decades of spilled coffee. Inside were routing instructions to places that shouldn't exist, and 7 rules written in red ink. "Follow these exactly," she said, her dark eyes reflecting something I couldn't quite place. The desert's been hungry lately. The rules were simple, deceptively so. Rule 1, never open the cargo doors between sunset and sunrise. Rule 2, if you hear scratching from inside the trailer, turn your radio to 107.9 FM and count backwards from 50. Rule 3, stop only at designated fuel stations marked with a red X painted beside the pump handles. Rule 4, if someone flags you down on the road, do not stop. Do not make eye contact. Rule 5, keep your CB radio on channel 19. If you hear someone calling your name repeatedly, switch to channel 40 immediately. Rule 6, the cargo must reach its destination before the 3rd sunrise after pickup. Rule 7, under no circumstances should you look at what you're hauling. That first run seemed straightforward enough. Pick up a sealed trailer from a warehouse in 29 Palms. haul it to a drop point near Searchlight, Nevada. The pay was 3 times my usual rate, enough to keep the wolves at bay for another month. The warehouse sat at the end of a dirt road that my GPS insisted didn't exist. Adobe walls baked white by decades of sun, surrounded by chain link topped with razor wire. A single guard shack stood beside the gate, manned by a heavy-set Navajo man who checked my paperwork twice before waving me through. "First time?" he asked, his voice carrying an accent that reminded me of my childhood summers with my grandmother in Gallup. "Yeah." He nodded slowly, studying my face. "Listen to Cassandra's rules, boy. Every word. The desert remembers when people forget." Inside the compound, workers in coveralls guided me to back up to a loading dock. They moved with the efficiency of people who'd done this countless times, but something felt off. Nobody talked. Nobody made eye contact. The only sounds were the beeping of my truck in reverse and the whisper of wind through the Joshua trees beyond the fence. The trailer was already loaded and sealed when I arrived. Standard dry van, except for the reinforced locks on the rear doors and the fact that it sat lower on its axles than it should have for whatever weight was inside. The manifest listed the cargo as machine parts, but the trailer's registration showed it had been custom built with reinforced walls and what looked like sound dampening material. One of the workers, a thin Hispanic man with tired eyes, approached my cab as I completed my pre-trip inspection. "Hermano," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure nobody was listening. "My cousin drove this route last month. Haven't seen him since." Before I could respond, a supervisor called out, and the worker hurried away, leaving me alone with my doubts and the weight of whatever sat behind me. The first few hours were routine. Highway 62 to Highway 95, through the scattered communities of Joshua Tree and Wonder Valley. The sun hung like a brass coin in a cloudless sky, turning the asphalt into ribbons of heat shimmer. My CB crackled with the usual chatter. Other drivers comparing fuel prices, complaining about DOT inspections, sharing locations of speed traps. Everything changed when I hit the open desert between Amboy and Needles. The scratching started around 4 p.m., just as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. At first, I thought it was road debris kicked up by my tires, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate, like fingernails dragging across wood. I reached for my radio, tuning to 107.9 as instructed. Static filled the cab, punctuated by what sounded like breathing. I started counting. 50, 49, 48. The scratching intensified. Not just scratching now, but something that sounded disturbingly like whispers. Words I couldn't quite make out, spoken in the language I didn't recognize. 37, 36, 35. My rearview mirror caught movement. For just a moment, I could have sworn the trailer was swaying side to side, as if something inside was throwing itself against the walls. 24, 23, 22. The whispering stopped. The scratching faded. By the time I reached 0, the only sound was the rumble of my diesel engine and the hum of tires on asphalt. I pulled into a truck stop in Needles as the sun touched the horizon, parking far from the other rigs. The fuel pumps bore no red X marks, so I didn't refuel. Just grabbed a coffee from the convenience store and tried to ignore the way other drivers looked at my trailer. A few pointed. One old-timer crossed himself. The night clerk, a young Mojave woman with intricate tattoos covering her forearms, rang up my coffee without a word. But as I turned to leave, she grabbed my wrist. "Your load," she whispered. "Where'd you pick it up?" 29 Palms. Her grip tightened. My great-grandmother told stories about that place, about things that should stay buried in the sand. She released my arm, her hand trembling. "Drive fast, trucker, and don't stop until you're past the state line." Back in my cab, I checked my watch. 7 hours to go before sunrise. I should have felt tired, but adrenaline kept my hands steady on the wheel. Mile after mile of empty highway stretched ahead, broken only by the occasional pair of headlights in the distance. But those headlights worried me, because in the desert at this hour, there shouldn't be any other traffic at all. The headlights stayed exactly 3 miles behind me for the next hour. I know because I've been checking my mirrors obsessively, watching those twin points of light maintain their distance like a mathematical equation. When I sped up to 70, they sped up. When I dropped to 60 through a construction zone, they dropped too. Never closer, never farther. My CB radio crackled to life around 10 p.m. "Eastbound Peterbilt, mile marker 127, come back." I picked up the handset, thumb hovering over the transmit button. Channel 19, just like the rules said. But something about that voice made my skin crawl. Too smooth, too friendly for this hour in this emptiness. "Eastbound Peterbilt, you got your ears on?" I set the radio down without responding. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. If someone flags you down on the road, do not stop. Do not make eye contact. Maybe that applied to radio contact too. The headlights crept closer. Highway 95 stretched ahead like a black river, bordered by creosote bushes and the skeletal remains of Joshua trees. The moon hung fat and yellow above the McCullough Range, casting shadows that seemed to writhe and shift in my peripheral vision. I cranked the air conditioning higher, but sweat still beaded on my forehead. "Jake Navarro, Jake Navarro, Jake Navarro." My name repeated from the CB speaker in that same sickeningly pleasant voice. Channel 19. I lunged for the radio, spinning the dial to channel 40. Static. Then silence. The headlights were now maybe a mile back. I pushed the Peterbilt harder, the speedometer needle climbing past 75. The diesel engine responded with a deeper growl, but those lights stayed with me like a bad memory. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. 20 minutes later, I spotted Salvation, a truck stop with red X marks beside each fuel pump. The Atomic Oasis, according to the neon sign that flickered sporadically in the darkness. I'd never heard of it, despite driving these routes for months. I pulled in, checking my mirrors. The mysterious vehicle had vanished. The fuel island was deserted except for one other truck, an ancient Kenworth with more rust than paint. Its driver stood beside his cab, a massive Paiute man wearing a leather vest decorated with silver conchos. He watched me park with eyes that held too much knowledge. "You're hauling for Cassandra," he said as I climbed down from my cab. Not a question. "How'd you know?" "Your trailer's singing." He gestured toward my load with a scarred hand. "Can hear it from here." I paused, listening. At first, nothing. Then faintly, something that might have been humming, a low, rhythmic sound like a lullaby sung underwater. "What am I carrying?" I asked. The big man shook his head. "Wrong question, brother. Right question is, what's carrying you?" He climbed into his Kenworth and pulled away, leaving me alone under the flickering neon. The fuel pumps were old-style mechanical units, the kind that required you to squeeze the handle manually. I topped off both tanks, the smell of diesel mixing with something else. Something organic and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. The station's convenience store was staffed by a teenage girl with purple hair and multiple piercings. She looked up from her phone as I entered, and I saw her expression change when she spotted my truck through the window. "You shouldn't be here," she said, "just buying some coffee." "No, I mean you shouldn't be here. This place," she gestured around the store, "with its dusty shelves and flickering fluorescent lights. It's not on any maps, only shows up for drivers carrying certain loads." I grabbed a cup and filled it from a coffee pot that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. What kind of loads? The kind that change people. Before I could ask what she meant, the door chime rang. Another customer entered, a woman in her 50s wearing a faded sundress and flip-flops. Nothing unusual about her appearance, except for her eyes. They were completely black. Not dark brown, not dilated pupils. Black as oil, reflecting the store's lights like polished obsidian. "Evening," she said to me, her voice carrying a slight Mexican accent. "Lovely night for a drive." The teenage clerk had gone pale, backing toward the rear of the store. I nodded politely to the woman and headed for the register, but she stepped into my path. "What you carrying, mijo?" she asked, tilting her head. "Smells interesting." "Just machine parts." She smiled, revealing teeth that were too white and too sharp. "Machine parts don't sing, machine parts don't dream." I tried to step around her, but she moved with me, always blocking my path to the door. The coffee in my hand had gone cold. "Let me tell you a story," she said, "about a truck driver who carried things he shouldn't carry, who saw things he shouldn't see. You know what happened to him? Lady, I just want to pay for my coffee and leave." He became part of the cargo. Her black eyes never blinked. Still driving these roads, they say. Still making deliveries. But the truck drives itself now, and what's left of the driver, well, that's in the trailer with everything else. The teenage clerk had disappeared entirely. I was alone in the store with this woman whose shadow fell wrong on the linoleum floor. Too long, too twisted, moving independently of her body. I threw a $5 bill on the counter and pushed past her toward the door. She didn't try to stop me this time, just laughed. The sound followed me across the parking lot like wind chimes made of bone. Back in my cab, I locked the doors and started the engine. The woman stood in the store's doorway, watching me pull away. In my side mirror, I saw her wave. The gesture looked normal, until I realized her arm was bending the wrong way at the elbow. The highway stretched ahead, empty again. My CB was silent, but in the darkness beyond my headlights, shapes moved parallel to the road. Shapes that ran on four legs but occasionally stood upright, matching my speed through the desert brush. I checked my watch. 1:47 a.m. Still hours until sunrise. And somewhere behind me, those headlights appeared again, maintaining their perfect distance. The scratching from my trailer had resumed, but now it was accompanied by something else. A soft tapping, like Morse code. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. Whatever was in my trailer was asking for help. The question was, help from what? The tapping continued for another 20 miles. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Over and over, until I wanted to scream. Whatever was in my trailer had learned the international distress signal, and that scared me more than the woman with oil-black eyes, or the shapes running through the desert brush. Because machines don't learn, and according to my manifest, I was hauling machine parts. At 2:15 a.m., my CB radio exploded with voices. Can't shake them. They're gaining on the passenger side. Saw Martinez's truck this morning. Doors ripped clean off. Driver's seat covered in. Don't stop at the Oasis. Repeat. Do not stop at the Atomic. I grabbed the handset. This is Jake Navarro, eastbound on 95. Anyone copy? Silence. I tried again. Any driver on 95? This is Jake in the white Peterbilt. If you can hear me, please respond. More silence. but in the static, I could swear I heard breathing. Slow, measured breaths that didn't match any human rhythm. The shapes in the desert had multiplied. I counted at least 6 now, keeping pace with my truck through the creosote and Palo Verde. Sometimes they ran on all fours like coyotes. Sometimes they stood upright, silhouettes against the star-drunk sky that looked disturbingly human. But their movements were wrong. Too fluid, joints bending in directions that defied anatomy. My headlights caught one crossing the road ahead. It paused in the middle of the asphalt, turning to face my truck. Even at 70 miles per hour, I could see its eyes reflecting my lights like mirrors. Not the typical green eyeshine of a coyote or the red reflection of a deer. These eyes glowed white-hot, like welding torches. It watched me approach, unmoving. I had maybe 3 seconds to decide whether to swerve or maintain course. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. If someone flags you down on the road, do not stop. Do not make eye contact. I kept my foot steady on the accelerator and my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The thing leaped aside at the last possible moment, but not before I caught a glimpse of its face in my peripheral vision. Human features stretched over an elongated skull, mouth open too wide, revealing rows of yellow teeth that belonged in a shark's jaw. My trailer shuddered as something struck it from behind. Then again, harder. The whole rig swayed as whatever had hit me tried to climb onto the roof. I could hear claws scraping against metal, see sparks in my mirrors where talons dragged across the trailer's surface. The tapping from inside had stopped. Now there was only scratching. Desperate, frantic scratching like fingernails on a coffin lid. I downshifted and floored the accelerator. The Peterbilt surged forward, diesel engine roaring. Whatever was on my trailer lost its grip and tumbled into the darkness behind me. In my mirrors, I saw it roll to a stop in the middle of the road, then stand up and brush itself off like a person who'd merely stumbled. The radio crackled again. Jake Navarro, Jake Navarro, Jake Navarro. This time the voice was different. Younger, desperate. "Who is this?" I demanded into the handset. "My name is David Chi. I drove this route last month. I'm still driving it." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. The worker at the warehouse, his cousin who'd disappeared. "Where are you?" I asked. "I don't know. Somewhere between the pickup and the drop. I've been driving for weeks, but I never reached the destination. The sun rises and sets, but the fuel gauge never moves. The odometer stays the same, and the cargo... God, Jake, the cargo won't stop moving." I checked my own fuel gauge, 3/4 full, same as when I'd left the atomic oasis. That was impossible. I'd been driving for over an hour since filling up. "David, what are we carrying?" I thought it was machine parts at first, but machine parts don't breathe. Machine parts don't cry, and they sure as hell don't try to claw their way out of reinforced steel. The scratching from my trailer intensified, as if whatever was inside could hear our conversation. "Listen to me," David continued, his voice fracturing with static. "There's a reason Cassandra pays so much for these runs. We're not just drivers. We're shepherds, keeping the flock contained until it reaches the slaughter." "What flock? What are you talking about?" "People, Jake. The cargo is people, or what used to be people. They collect them from all over the desert. Hikers who went missing, migrant workers who disappeared crossing the border, truckers who took the wrong route at the wrong time. They transform them, change them, and then they ship them somewhere else." I felt sick. The coffee in my stomach churned toward my throat. "But here's the thing." David's voice was fading, distance or interference breaking up his words. "The rules aren't meant to protect us from them. The rules are meant to protect them from us. Because if we break even one rule, if we show them the smallest mercy, they remember what they used to be. And that's when they really start fighting to get out. David? David, are you still there? Static. Then, faintly, "Don't look in the trailer, Jake. Whatever you do, don't." The radio went dead. I was alone again with the humming desert and the weight of what David had told me. Every bump in the road, every shift in the trailer's balance, now felt different. Heavier, more urgent. The tapping resumed. Not SOS this time, but something more complex. A pattern I almost recognized. Then it hit me. It was shave and a haircut. The old knock that kids use on doors, waiting for someone to respond with 2 bits. Something in my trailer was playing games. I reached for my CB, intent on trying to raise David again, when my headlights illuminated a figure standing beside the road. A woman in a hospital gown, waving frantically for me to stop. Her face was streaked with tears, her bare feet bloody from walking across the desert. Rule 4, do not stop. Do not make eye contact. But she looked so real, so human, so desperate. Not like the thing with sharp teeth or the woman with oil-black eyes. This was just a person who needed help. I started to ease off the accelerator. That's when I noticed her shadow. It fell backward, toward the light source instead of away from it. And her hospital gown wasn't white. It was gray, stained with something dark that could have been blood, or could have been something worse. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, fighting every instinct that told me to stop and help. As I passed her, she turned to follow my truck with her eyes. In my side mirror, I watched her mouth open in a silent scream that revealed a throat full of writhing shadows. Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness. The shapes in the desert had fallen back, no longer keeping pace with my truck. Maybe they only hunted in certain territories. Maybe they'd found easier prey. Or maybe they were just waiting for me to make a mistake. Ahead, the highway curved around a series of low hills. Beyond those hills lay Searchlight, Nevada, and my delivery destination. According to my GPS, I had less than 50 miles to go. But my odometer still read the same as when I'd left the atomic oasis, and when I checked my watch, it showed 2:15 a.m., the exact same time David Chi had first contacted me on the radio. Time wasn't moving forward anymore. It was trapped in a loop, just like David. Just like me. Unless I could find a way to break the cycle before sunrise, or before I became another voice on the radio, warning the next driver about cargo that used to be human. I tried everything to break the time loop. Changing speeds, taking different routes, even stopping the truck entirely for 10 minutes. Nothing worked. Every time I checked my watch, it read 2:15 a.m. The fuel gauge remained frozen at 3/4 full. The odometer hadn't budged a tenth of a mile. The scratching from my trailer had evolved into something more organized. No longer random clawing, but what sounded like construction. Scraping metal, the squeal of bolts being turned, the rhythmic pounding of something being assembled or disassembled. Whatever was back there had found tools, or made them. My CB crackled with David's voice again, but this time he sounded different, calmer, resigned. "Jake, you still out there?" "Yeah, I'm here. How long have you been trapped in this loop? Time doesn't work the same way anymore. Could be days, could be years. The desert swallows time like it swallows everything else." His signal was clearer now, as if we were getting closer to each other. "I've been thinking about what I told you. About the cargo being people. You said they transform them. That's only part of it. See, I've been listening to the sounds from my trailer. Really listening. And I think they're not just transformed. They're still aware. still themselves, trapped inside bodies that don't belong to them anymore. The construction sounds from my trailer stopped abruptly, replaced by something worse. Weeping. Soft, broken sobs that carried through the reinforced walls like they were made of paper. "Jesus," I whispered. "I broke Rule 7 last week," David continued. "Opened the rear doors during daylight just for a second. What I saw..." His voice cracked. "Jake, they still have their faces, twisted, stretched, wrong, but I could see who they used to be. A teenage girl with a backpack, an old man in hiking boots, a woman in a business suit who probably just took a wrong turn somewhere." The weeping intensified. Multiple voices now, a chorus of the lost and transformed. "But here's the thing that really messes with my head," David said. "When they saw me looking, they tried to speak. Not with words, but with their eyes. And they weren't asking to be set free. They were warning me to stay away." Warning you? Because they know what they've become. And they know it's contagious. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What do you mean, contagious?" "The transformation doesn't just happen to the cargo, Jake. It happens to anyone who shows them mercy. Anyone who breaks the rules trying to help them. That's why the rules exist. Not to protect us from them, but to protect us from ourselves." Static consumed his transmission for several seconds. When his voice returned, it was distant and fading. "I can see lights ahead. Bright lights, like a facility of some kind. I think I'm finally approaching the destination." "David, wait." "If you find a way out of this loop, Jake, don't come looking for me. And whatever you do, don't try to save the cargo. Some people are beyond saving." The radio went silent. I drove in that silence for what felt like hours, but registered as no time at all on my watch. The desert landscape remained constant. The same Joshua trees, the same rocky outcroppings, the same stretch of highway repeating endlessly. I began to recognize individual cacti, specific road signs, particular formations of stone that I'd passed dozens of times. The sounds from my trailer had changed again. Now it was singing. Not human voices, but something that might have been human once. Harmonies that rose and fell like wind through canyon walls, beautiful and terrible at the same time. The melody was familiar. An old hymn my grandmother used to sing in Spanish. Alma Mia, a song about souls finding their way home. But these souls weren't going home. They were going somewhere else entirely. I was starting to understand the true horror of what Cassandra Yazzie was running. Not just human trafficking, but something far worse. She was collecting people who wouldn't be missed. The lost, the forgotten, the ones society had already written off. Then she was changing them into something that could survive in places humans weren't meant to go. The question was, where were they being sent? And why? My headlights caught movement ahead. Not the four-legged shapes from before, but something bipedal walking down the center line of the highway. As I got closer, I could see it was wearing the uniform of a highway patrol officer. He turned as my truck approached, raising his hand in the universal gesture to pull over. His face was normal, human, concerned. But his shadow stretched too far in the wrong direction, and when he moved, his joints bent with the fluid grace of something that had never been bound by human limitations. Rule 4. Do not stop. Do not make eye contact. I maintained speed, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. But as I passed him, he spoke in a voice that carried perfectly through my closed windows and over the sound of my engine. Jake Navarro. License number T, X7731891, born October 15th, 1985, in El Paso. Father deceased, mother remarried, and living in Tucson. No children, no wife, no one who would miss you if you disappeared. I glanced in my mirror. He was walking backward now, keeping pace with my truck somehow, still talking. We know everything about you, Jake. Your service record from 29 Palms, your father's debts, your financial situation. We chose you specifically. Chose me for what? I shouted, though I knew he couldn't hear me. But somehow, he answered anyway. To deliver our packages, to follow our rules, to become one of our drivers permanently. His voice was fading as I pulled away, but his final words cut through the engine noise like a blade. The loop only ends one way, Jake. When you accept what you've become. The highway straightened ahead, and in the distance I could see lights. Bright industrial lighting that turned the desert night into artificial day. A facility of some kind, just like David had described. But I wasn't ready to reach that destination. Not yet. Because I was beginning to formulate a plan. A way to break the loop that didn't involve accepting my fate, or abandoning the cargo to whatever horrible purpose they served. It was risky. It would require breaking at least 2 of Cassandra's rules, and it might cost me everything. But as the singing from my trailer shifted into a lullaby that sounded like a mother comforting a frightened child, I realized I couldn't live with the alternative. Some rules were meant to be broken. The facility grew larger in my windshield, and I could see figures moving around the loading docks. Figures that moved too smoothly, too purposefully. They were waiting for me. Time to find out if a man could change his destiny, or if destiny always won in the end. I pulled off the highway, half a mile from the facility, parking behind a cluster of boulders that had been weathered into strange, organic shapes by millennia of desert wind. The industrial lights ahead cast harsh shadows between the rocks, creating a maze of darkness where anything could hide. The singing from my trailer had stopped. Now there was only silence, pregnant with anticipation. I checked my weapons, the Colt 45 in my glove compartment, a relic from my Marine days, the tire iron behind my seat, the emergency flare kit. Not much against whatever was waiting at that facility, but it would have to do. Breaking Rule 7 meant opening the cargo doors during darkness. Breaking Rule 1 meant looking at what I was hauling. I was about to violate the 2 most fundamental commandments of this job, and I had no idea what the consequences might be. But David's words echoed in my mind. They were warning me to stay away, because they know what they've become, and they know it's contagious. Maybe the contagion only spread to those who tried to help out of greed or selfish motives. Maybe it couldn't touch someone who acted out of genuine compassion. Or maybe I was about to doom myself to the same fate as the cargo I was trying to save. Only one way to find out. I climbed down from my cab, boots crunching on gravel that glittered with flecks of mica in the starlight. The desert air was cooler now, carrying scents of sage and something else. Something medicinal and wrong, like formaldehyde mixed with ozone. The trailer's rear doors were secured with 3 separate locks, heavy-duty padlocks that would normally require bolt cutters to breach. But the scratching and construction sounds had been coming from inside for hours. Maybe whatever was in there had done some of the work for me. I approached the doors slowly, ears straining for any sound. The facility's distant humming masked most ambient noise, but I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my chest and the whisper of wind through the Joshua trees. The first lock was hanging open, still attached to its hasp, but no longer securing anything. The second had been completely removed, lying in the gravel beside the trailer. The third was intact but showed signs of tampering. Scratches around the keyhole, metal filings scattered on the bumper. Something inside had been trying to escape. I grabbed the door handles and paused, This was my last chance to walk away, to drive to the facility and complete my delivery like a good little shepherd. To accept whatever fate Cassandra had planned for me and hope it would be quick. Instead, I pulled the doors open. The smell hit me first, not the copper and rot I'd expected, but something clinical. Antiseptic, like a hospital operating room. Emergency lighting along the trailer's ceiling revealed medical equipment mounted to the walls, IV stands, monitoring devices, restraint systems. This wasn't just a cargo trailer. It was a mobile medical facility. The cargo occupied the center of the space. At first glance, it looked like medical specimens in transport containers. Clear cylindrical pods filled with some kind of preservation fluid. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, I realized the pods weren't preserving specimens. They were incubating them. The pods contained people, or what had once been people. Men, women, children, suspended in that viscous fluid with breathing apparatus covering their faces. But their bodies were wrong. Elongated limbs, additional joints, skin that had taken on a gray, waxy appearance, and their eyes, open and aware, tracking my movement with an intelligence that spoke of consciousness trapped in transforming flesh. One of the pods had been damaged from the inside. Claw marks scored the transparent aluminum, and preservation fluid had leaked onto the trailer floor. The pod was empty now, its occupant missing. A soft sound behind me made me turn. Standing in the shadows near the door was a figure that might have been human once. It wore the tattered remains of hiking clothes, and its face still held traces of who it had been, a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. But her proportions were wrong. Arms too long, fingers that ended in curved talons, legs that bent backward at the knees like a bird's. When she opened her mouth to speak, I could see rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Please," she said, and her voice was perfectly human despite the inhuman throat it came from. "Please don't let them finish what they started." I raised my hands, showing I was unarmed. "What did they do to you?" "Adaptation therapy." She gestured toward the other pods with one elongated arm. "They're preparing us for colonization. Places where normal humans can't survive. Worlds with different atmospheres, different gravity, different predators." Worlds? The facility processes thousands of people every year. Homeless, undocumented immigrants, missing hikers, anyone society won't look for. They transform us into something that can survive in hostile environments, then ship us off-world to establish footholds for human expansion. She moved closer, and I could see the anguish in her transformed features. But the process doesn't just change our bodies. It changes our minds, makes us loyal to whoever controls the transformation, turns us into willing slaves. How do you still remember? How are you still yourself? The process isn't complete yet. A few more hours in the pod, and I would have lost everything that made me human. She looked back at her empty container with a mixture of longing and revulsion. Sometimes I think that would be easier. More sounds from the other pods. Scraping, tapping, movement in the fluid. The other subjects were waking up, responding to our conversation. "Can the process be reversed?" I asked. "I don't know, but I know we can't let them complete it." She gestured toward the facility's lights. "That's the processing center. Once we're delivered there, we'll be loaded onto transport ships and sent to places that exist between the stars." "What do you need me to do?" "The other pods have emergency release mechanisms, manual overrides in case of system failure. If you can free the others before they're fully transformed, maybe we can stop this convoy permanently." I looked at the remaining pods, counting 12 occupied units, 12 people trapped in various stages of transformation, still aware enough to suffer, but changed enough to survive whatever hellish environments they were being prepared for. What happens to you if I release them now? We die. Her transformed features held no self-pity. The adaptation process creates dependencies. We need the fluid to survive now, but dying free is better than living as slaves. There has to be another way. Jake. She said my name with surprising gentleness. You can't save us. We're already gone. What you can do is make sure no one else goes through this. She moved to the nearest pod, showing me the emergency release panel. Red button releases the restraints. Yellow drains the fluid, but once you start, you have to finish all of them quickly. The facility monitors these pods remotely. They'll know something's wrong within minutes. I looked at her. This woman who had been transformed into something monstrous, but retained enough humanity to choose death over slavery. What's your name? Sarah. She almost smiled. Sarah Chan. I was hiking the Pacific Crest Trail when they took me, 3 months ago. I'm sorry this happened to you. Just make it count. I moved to the first pod, hand hovering over the release panel. Inside, a middle-aged man floated in the preservation fluid, his body stretched and altered, but his eyes still human, still aware. When he saw me, he pressed one transformed hand against the transparent wall and nodded. I pressed the red button. Restraints retracted with mechanical precision. I hit the yellow button, and the pod began draining. The man inside convulsed as the fluid receded, his adapted lungs struggling with normal air. By the time I reached the fourth pod, alarms were sounding in the distance. Bright lights blazed to life around the facility, and I could see vehicles racing across the desert toward our position. "Faster!" Sarah urged, moving to help with the release mechanisms. We worked frantically, freeing the remaining subjects one by one. Most died within minutes of leaving their pods, their transformed bodies unable to survive without the preservation fluid. But a few lingered long enough to speak, to thank us, to tell us their names, to die as themselves instead of as slaves. The last pod contained a child, maybe 12 years old. The transformation had barely begun, leaving him mostly human except for elongated limbs and gray-tinted skin. When the fluid drained, he gasped and cried, reaching for Sarah with arms that stretched too far. "Mama," he whispered, and Sarah gathered him close despite the talons and the inhuman proportions. "I'm here," she told him. "I'm here." Vehicle engines roared closer. Spotlights swept across the rocks, searching for us. We had maybe 2 minutes before they arrived. "Sarah, there's something else," I said. "The time loop. I've been trapped driving the same stretch of highway for hours. Do you know how to break it?" She looked up from the dying child in her arms. "Destroy the processing facility. It generates a temporal field to prevent drivers from reaching outside authorities. Break the field generators, and time resume his normal flow." "Where are the generators?" "Central building, large silver dishes on the roof. But Jake..." She was growing weaker, the effort of staying outside her pod taking its toll. The facility is heavily guarded, and the staff aren't entirely human anymore either. The first vehicle crested the hill, headlights blazing. I could see armed figures in the back, moving with that same fluid grace I'd observed in the fake highway patrolmen. "Go," Sarah said. "Finish this." I grabbed my weapons from the cab and looked back one more time. Sarah was still holding the child, singing that same lullaby I'd heard from inside the trailer. But now I could understand the words. A Navajo song about spirits finding their way to the next world. I ran into the desert, leaving the empty trailer and its cargo of the freed dead behind me. The facility waited ahead, humming with alien purpose. Time to end this nightmare once and for all. The facility sprawled across the desert floor like a metallic cancer, all gleaming surfaces and harsh angles that seemed to reject the organic curves of the surrounding landscape. 3 main buildings connected by enclosed walkways, surrounded by a perimeter fence topped with razor wire. Guard towers stood at each corner, their spotlights sweeping methodically across the compound. I approached from the east, using a dry wash to stay below the sight lines of the towers. The armed teams had reached my abandoned trailer, their shouts echoing across the desert as they discovered what I'd done. Soon they'd start hunting for me, but I had maybe 10 minutes before they organized a proper search. The central building rose highest, its roof bristling with the silver dishes Sarah had described. Satellite arrays and communications equipment clustered around them like technological mushrooms. If those were the temporal field generators, destroying them would be my only chance of breaking free from this nightmare. I climbed out of the wash 50 yards from the fence, studying the patrol patterns. Guards moved along the perimeter at regular intervals, but their timing was too precise, too synchronized. Like synchronized swimmers, they turned corners and changed direction with mathematical precision. Not human behavior. Enhanced reflexes, maybe, or some kind of hive mind coordination. The fence posed the first challenge. 12 feet of chain link topped with concertina wire, probably electrified. But desert facilities like this always had weak points. Drainage culverts, service entrances, places where function trumped security. I found what I was looking for near the southwest corner. A storm drain that passed under the fence, designed to prevent flash floods from washing out the foundation. The opening was barely wide enough for a man, but it was my best option. I crawled through on my belly, feeling decades of accumulated debris scrape against my back. Spider webs caught in my hair, and something scurried away from my flashlight beam. The tunnel stretched for maybe 20 yards before emerging inside the compound, near a cluster of storage tanks. Industrial sounds filled the night air. The hum of machinery, the hiss of pneumatic systems, the low rumble of generators. But underneath those mechanical noises, I heard something else. Voices. Human voices raised in what might have been prayer or might have been screaming. I made my way between the storage tanks, using their shadows for cover. The central building loomed ahead, its windows glowing with harsh white light. Through the glass, I could see figures moving inside, people in lab coats working at control panels, technicians monitoring banks of screens that displayed vital signs and transformation metrics. A side door offered the easiest access. I approached it carefully, checking for security cameras or motion sensors. The door was unmarked, probably a maintenance entrance. I tried the handle, expecting it to be locked. It opened easily. Too easily. I stepped inside, weapon drawn, and found myself in a sterile corridor lined with observation windows. Each window looked into a small room containing medical equipment and restraint devices. Some rooms were occupied. People in various stages of transformation, strapped to examination tables, while masked figures worked on them with instruments I didn't recognize. The voices I'd heard outside were louder here, echoing from ventilation shafts and through thin walls. Not prayers or screams, but something worse. The sound of people begging to be allowed to forget who they used to be. The neural reconditioning is proceeding ahead of schedule, a voice said behind me. I spun around, raising my pistol. A woman in a white lab coat stood at the far end of the corridor, clipboard in hand, watching me with calm interest. She looked perfectly normal except for her eyes, the same oil-black voids I'd seen at the atomic oasis. "Mr. Navarro," she continued, making a note on her clipboard. "Right on time." "You were expecting me?" "Of course. Breaking the conditioning rules is part of the psychological evaluation. We need drivers who can show initiative when circumstances require it. She walked closer. I'm afraid of my weapon. My name is Dr. Martinez. I've been looking forward to meeting you. The hell you have. You freed 13 subjects from Trailer 7 Alpha. 12 died immediately. One survived for approximately 7 minutes. Very good response time. Most drivers take much longer to decide. My finger tightened on the trigger. This was all a test? Everything is a test, Mr. Navarro. The rules, the loops, the supernatural encounters. We monitor every variable to identify candidates suitable for enhanced conditioning. Enhanced conditioning? The transformation process works better on subjects who demonstrate both compassion and leadership capability. Standard abductees provide adequate workers, but we need supervisors. Foremen. Individuals capable of managing large groups in hostile environments. She gestured toward one of the observation windows. Inside, a figure I recognized was strapped to an examination table. Roberto Mendez, the trucker who'd first told me about Cassandra's operation. Tubes snaked from his arms, and his body showed the early stages of the elongation process. Mr. Mendez performed admirably during his evaluation, Dr. Martinez continued. He's being prepared for a supervisory position on Kepler 452b. The atmospheric pressure there requires extensive physical modifications. You're all insane. We're visionaries. Humanity's expansion beyond Earth requires sacrifice. Better to transform the forgotten and unwanted than to risk valuable citizens. I backed toward the door I'd entered through, keeping my weapon trained on her. The temporal field generators. Where are they? 3rd floor, room 317. But destroying them won't help you, Mr. Navarro. The conditioning process has already begun. What conditioning process? The moment you opened those trailer doors, you were exposed to Class 7 neural parasites, microscopic organisms that integrate with human brain tissue and alter behavioral patterns. They're designed to increase compliance and reduce resistance to physical transformation. A cold weight settled in my stomach. You're lying. Check your hands. I glanced down. My free hand was trembling slightly, and the skin around my fingernails had taken on a grayish tint. The same discoloration I'd seen on the subjects in the pods. The parasites work quickly in most subjects, Dr. Martinez said, but you're showing unusual resistance. Probably genetic. We'll want to study that trait. I raised my weapon. Study this. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the sterile corridor. Dr. Martinez staggered backward, dark fluid spreading across her lab coat. But instead of falling, she straightened up and smiled, revealing teeth that had grown noticeably sharper in the last few minutes. Physical damage is temporary for enhanced personnel, she said. But thank you for the demonstration. Your aggression levels are exactly what we need for the Titan project. More figures appeared at both ends of the corridor. Lab technicians and security guards, all moving with that same fluid coordination I'd observed outside. Their eyes held the same oil-black depths, and their movements were too smooth, too purposeful. I ran. The corridor branched ahead, offering choices between elevators and stairwells. I took the stairs, climbing toward the 3rd floor and whatever lay waiting in room 317. Behind me, footsteps echoed with mechanical precision. Not the chaotic pursuit of humans, but the coordinated hunt of a pack. The stairwell walls were lined with motivational posters showing exotic landscapes under alien skies. "New worlds need new workers," proclaimed one. Another featured a family photo of people with elongated limbs and gray skin. "Adaptation is evolution." I reached the 3rd floor, gasping for breath. the gray discoloration spreading up my arms despite my resistance to whatever organisms were invading my system. The parasites were winning, slowly but inevitably altering my biochemistry. Room 317 lay at the end of another corridor. This one lined with computer terminals, displaying star charts and colonization schedules. I could see my destination through the doorway, a chamber filled with the silver dishes Sarah had described, humming with electromagnetic energy. But standing between me and the temporal field generators was Cassandra Yazzie herself. She turned as I approached, and I could see that whatever transformations the others had undergone, hers had progressed much further. Her proportions were stretched and alien. Her fingers ended in metallic claws, and her face had elongated into something that might have been beautiful if it weren't so utterly inhuman. "Hello, Jake," she said in a voice like wind through bone. "Ready to take your place among the stars?" I raised my weapon, knowing it probably wouldn't help, but needing to try anyway. The gray discoloration had reached my elbows, and I could feel my thoughts becoming sluggish, more compliant. "The generators," I managed to say. "How do I destroy them?" "You don't," Cassandra replied. "You join us, willingly or otherwise." She moved toward me with predatory grace, and I realized my time for heroics was running out. The parasites were winning, my body was changing, and soon I'd be just another supervisor helping to process the next batch of unwilling colonists. But I still had one card left to play, something the parasites couldn't touch, because it wasn't biological. The emergency flare kit on my belt. The emergency flares burned at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt aluminum and destroy delicate electronics. I had 6 of them clipped to my belt, originally intended for roadside emergencies. Now they were my only hope of stopping this nightmare. Cassandra moved closer, her transformed features shifting in the harsh fluorescent light. "The parasites are adapting your neural pathways as we speak, Jake. Soon you'll understand why resistance is pointless, why serving the expansion is humanity's greatest calling." "Humanity," I spat, pulling the first flare from my belt. "What you're doing isn't human anymore. Evolution never is." She gestured toward the humming generators with one metallic claw. "These devices don't just manipulate time. They open doorways between worlds, gateways that allow us to seed human life across the galaxy." I yanked the cap off the flare and struck the igniter. Red fire erupted in my hand, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The smell of burning magnesium filled the air. "Step away from the generators, Cassandra." "No, I don't think you understand the scope of what we're accomplishing here. Thousands of worlds await colonization. Planets with methane atmospheres, crushing gravity, radiation levels that would kill normal humans in minutes, but our adapted subjects can survive anywhere." The gray discoloration had reached my shoulders now, and I could feel my grip weakening on the flare. The parasites were attacking my motor control, trying to force compliance through biochemical manipulation. "Those people in the pods," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "They didn't volunteer for this. Society discarded them long ago. We're giving their lives meaning, purpose. You're turning them into slaves. We're creating the future of human civilization." Her oil-black eyes reflected the flare's light like polished obsidian. "And you're going to help us, whether you choose to or not." I hurled the flare at the nearest generator. The device erupted in sparks and smoke as the magnesium core melted through its casing. Alarms shrieked throughout the facility, and the temporal field generators began shutting down in sequence. I could feel the change immediately. Time resuming its normal flow, the oppressive weight of the time loop lifting from my shoulders. Cassandra screamed, a sound that combined human anguish with something far more alien. You have no idea what you've done. I've given people their freedom back. You've doomed them all. She lunged at me with inhuman speed, claws extended. Without the temporal barriers, the gateways will destabilize. Every world we've seeded, every colony we've established, they'll be cut off forever. I dodged her attack and with a second flare, throwing it at another generator. The explosion was larger this time, fragments of molten metal spraying across the room. Through the facility's windows, I could see vehicles racing away from the compound, staff evacuating before the entire operation collapsed. But Cassandra wasn't giving up. She circled me like a predator, her movements becoming more fluid and coordinated as whatever controlled her adapted to my resistance. The colonies will die without regular supply shipments, she continued. Millions of adapted humans struggling to survive on alien worlds, abandoned because you destroyed their only lifeline home. The third flare caught 2 generators simultaneously, their destruction triggering a cascade failure throughout the system. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power grid overloaded. Maybe, I said, lighting the 4th flare, but at least they'll die free. Freedom is an illusion for beings struggling against extinction. She feinted left, then struck from the right, claws raking across my chest. The impact sent me stumbling backward, but the pain felt distant, muffled by the parasite's influence on my nervous system. I looked down at my arms. The gray discoloration had spread past my elbows, and my hands were beginning to elongate. Whatever time I had left as a recognizably human being was measured in minutes. The 4th flare destroyed the primary control console, sending electrical fire racing through cable conduits in the walls. The remaining generators were shutting down automatically, their cooling systems overwhelmed by the heat and electrical feedback. It's too late, Cassandra said, but her voice held less confidence now. The transformation process is irreversible. You'll become one of us regardless. Maybe. But I'll die knowing I stopped you from taking anyone else. I lit the 5th flare and threw it at the largest generator, the one that appeared to be the master control unit. The explosion shattered windows throughout the building, and I felt the temporal field collapse entirely. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear normal radio chatter resuming. Truckers on Highway 95 wondering why their GPS units had been malfunctioning. Dispatcher voices coordinating legitimate freight runs. The real world was reasserting itself. Cassandra fell to her knees as the generators died, her transformed features contorting with pain. You don't understand. We were chosen, selected by beings far older and wiser than humanity. They gave us the technology to spread our species across the stars. They gave you the technology to enslave people. Enslavement is a primitive concept. We were creating unity, purpose, a future where human consciousness could exist on any world, in any form necessary for survival. I lit the final flare, holding it like a torch as I approached her. The gray discoloration had reached my neck now, and I could feel my thoughts becoming stranger, more detached from human emotion. Where are these beings who chose you? I asked. Cassandra looked up at me with something that might have been pity. They're coming, Jake. The gateways weren't just for sending our people out. They were for bringing our benefactors in. And now, thanks to you, they'll arrive to find their advanced preparations destroyed. Good. You think they'll simply accept this setback? That they'll abandon Earth because one facility was compromised? She struggled to her feet, her proportions shifting as internal mechanisms compensated for damaged systems. There are dozens of operations like this one. Processing centers in the Arctic, underwater facilities in the deepest ocean trenches, orbital platforms hidden on the dark side of the moon. The final flare caught the last generator as it attempted an emergency restart sequence. The device exploded with enough force to crack the concrete floor, and the entire facility plunged into darkness, except for battery-powered emergency lighting. "Then someone else will have to stop them," I said. "Someone like you." Cassandra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Look at yourself, Jake. Look at what you're becoming." I caught my reflection in a shattered window. My face was elongating, my skin taking on that familiar gray pallor. But my eyes were still human, still angry, still determined. "The parasites don't control everything," I said. "Free will still counts for something. For now. But the transformation is accelerating. Soon you'll see the logic of what we're doing. You'll understand why individual freedom must be sacrificed for species survival." I walked to the window and looked out at the desert. Dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Beautiful, peaceful, nothing like the alien vistas shown in the facility's propaganda posters. "Maybe I'll transform completely," I said. "Maybe I'll lose everything that makes me human. But right now, in this moment, I choose to fight back." I hurled the burned-out flare through the shattered window, watching it tumble toward the desert floor 3 stories below. And right now, that's enough. Cassandra started toward me, but her movements were becoming erratic as the parasitic control systems failed without the generator's support. "This isn't over, Jake. Our benefactors will send others, build new facilities. The expansion will continue. Then I guess someone will have to warn people." I climbed onto the windowsill, looking down at the compound below. Emergency vehicles were evacuating the last personnel, leaving behind smoking ruins and the scattered debris of an alien conspiracy. Someone who knows what to look for. You can't escape what you're becoming. Watch me. I jumped. The 3-story fall should have killed me, but my transformed physiology absorbed the impact. I rolled to my feet in the desert sand, feeling bones that bent in new directions and muscles that responded with inhuman coordination. The parasites had changed my body, but they hadn't changed my mind. Not yet. I walked toward the highway, where the sound of normal traffic was resuming as the temporal barriers faded. Somewhere out there were other facilities, other conspiracies, other people who needed to know what was happening in the empty places of the world. My truck was probably impounded by now, my legitimate hauling career finished. But there were other ways to travel, other ways to investigate, other ways to fight back against the beings who saw humanity as nothing more than raw material for cosmic expansion. I had work to do, and thanks to the parasites, I now had the physical capabilities to do it. The question was, how long could I stay human enough to remember why it mattered? The coffee tastes like rust and regret, but I drink it anyway. The diner sits on the outskirts of Flagstaff, one of those 24-hour places that caters to truckers and insomniacs. Perfect for someone like me, someone who doesn't sleep much anymore and prefers to avoid crowds during daylight hours. My reflection in the window shows a man who could pass for human if you don't look too closely. The gray skin tone fades with makeup. Sunglasses hide the fact that my pupils have elongated into vertical slits. Gloves cover fingers that are now too long and end in points that aren't quite claws yet. But the real changes run deeper than appearance. I can hear conversations 3 booths away. My peripheral vision extends almost 180 degrees. I haven't needed to eat solid food in weeks. Somehow my altered metabolism extracts nutrients directly from liquids. The parasites didn't just change my body, they rewired my entire biological system. The transformation should have made me compliant. According to Dr. Martinez's notes, the ones I recovered from the Mojave facility's wreckage, Neural integration typically produces absolute loyalty to the expansion program within 72 hours of initial exposure. I've been changed for 6 weeks now, still angry, still human where it counts. The laptop screen in front of me displays shipping manifests, missing person reports, and satellite imagery of remote locations across the American Southwest. Pattern recognition was always one of my strengths, but now I can process information at rates that would have been impossible before the parasites enhanced my neural pathways, and the patterns are everywhere once you know how to look. Trucking companies that only hire drivers with no family connections, freight routes that don't appear on any official DOT databases, facilities in the middle of nowhere that consume massive amounts of electrical power but produce no detectable output. Missing persons cases that cluster around specific geographical coordinates. The Mojave operation was just one node in the network that spans continents. My phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. Found another one. M. The sender's identity remains a mystery, but over the past month, this anonymous contact has provided intelligence about facility locations, personnel movements, and transport schedules. Someone else is fighting this war, using methods I can't even guess at. The email contains coordinates in northern Alaska and satellite photos showing a compound that looks eerily similar to the Mojave facility. The message includes a single line of text. Inuit villages reporting missing hunters. Timeline suggests active processing. Your choice. I close the laptop and finish my coffee. The transformation has given me advantages I never expected. Enhanced strength, improved senses, the ability to survive in environments that would kill normal humans. But it's also put me on a countdown clock. The parasites continue their integration work, slowly rewriting my consciousness to align with their programming. Every day, the alien thoughts feel a little more reasonable. Every night, I dream of distant worlds under foreign stars, and part of me wonders what it would be like to walk beneath those skies. How long before I stop fighting? How long before I start believing that individual freedom really is a luxury humanity can't afford? The diner's front door chimes as another customer enters. A trucker, based on his appearance, worn jeans, company logo shirt, the tired look of someone who's been driving all night. He takes a seat at the counter and orders coffee, but something about him triggers my enhanced senses. His movements are too coordinated, his breathing too regular, and when he turns his head to scan the room, I catch a glimpse of oil-black eyes. They've found me. I leave money on the table and walk toward the exit, moving casually despite the adrenaline flooding my altered bloodstream. The trucker's head tracks my movement, confirming my suspicions. He reaches for something under his jacket. I'm through the door and sprinting across the parking lot before he can draw whatever weapon he's carrying. My elongated legs cover ground with efficiency that still surprises me, and I reach my stolen motorcycle while he's still navigating through the diner's tables. The engine roars to life, and I'm gone into the Arizona night, heading north toward coordinates that represent another chance to disrupt their operations. In my rearview mirror, headlights appear. Not following at a distance this time, but closing fast. They're not interested in subtle surveillance anymore. The highway stretches ahead, empty and dark. Perfect hunting ground for predators. But the question remains, who's hunting whom? I twist the throttle and disappear into the desert, carrying secrets that could expose a conspiracy spanning worlds, but also carrying parasites that grow stronger every day, slowly converting me into the very thing I'm fighting against. The transformation isn't complete yet. I'm still human enough to choose which side I'm on. For now.